Hello and howdy, my name is Theo Telega and I'm a student from Centennial College's Game Development program, and I'm here to talk to you about weapon design in action role-playing games. Weapons are incredibly important for games. Across thousands of titles, weapons are the tools by which players interact with the world and a source of near-instant cause and effect. In many cases, weapons are one of many tools for players, and in many other cases, they are the only tools. With such an essential role, their importance is fairly plain to see. Yet at the same time, the actual design of weapons is rarely thought about. This is pretty natural. So much of what makes weapons memorable is their juice and visual design. But these essential elements are established by the design, not the other way around. So, let's take a look at weapon design. To start, weapons are best designed according to a specific method, which helps unite their design around the desired MDA elements and the style the game is going after. There are plenty of methods that are used to design weapons, but here we're going to look at three common ones. Each method entails a certain framework by which weapons are made, which is very important in games that require numerous weapons. Without a framework, the game would not be able to effectively support its aesthetics, have inconsistent and clunky mechanics, and struggle to build dynamics. It'll come off poorly to players, simply put. A method is a matter of consistency, and thus an absolute necessity for competent design. Let's start with one of the most common methods, weapons as side grades. In this method, weapons are divided into categories that have certain defining traits. Entries are then made to round out these categories by providing modifications and flexibility to a general formula. This method is quite popular in recent years, particularly with From Software's Dark Souls series and Elden Ring. Naturally, it's also very popular in Souls-like games, Neo for an example, and ARPGs that combine FPS elements like Destiny 1 and 2. The categorization of weapon types in From Software's recent ARPGs are fantastic examples of this method in practice. Each weapon type has a general formula in the form of damage types, damage dealt, and most importantly, attack animations. The speed, trajectory, timing, recovery, and conditions of these animations are the core component of separating the categories, but not the only one. Side grades come as variations on the surrounding elements, the damage amount, damage typing, size, and reach of the weapon, and of course, some animations do change. To get an example of how this works, let's look at Dark Souls 3. Specifically, let's take three entries from the Ultra Greatsword class of weapons. The Zweihander, Astoria Greatsword, and Cathedral Knight Greatsword. Both the Zweihander and Astoria Greatsword have the same one-handed heavies and lights. When two-handed, however, the Zweihander's heavies transition to overhead swings that deal slashing damage, while the Astoria Greatsword instead has these far-reaching thrusts that deal piercing damage. That extra damage type helps it deal with a few more enemies that the Zweihander can't. The Cathedral Knight Greatsword shares the same lights as both the other Ultra Greatswords when one-handed, but its one-handed heavies change to overhead swings. When two-handed, it has an entirely different set of lights and heavies to the other weapons, being overhead swings with the light, and a thrust followed by an overhead swing for the heavy attacks. The Cathedral Knight Greatsword is thus a little bit more specialized in single-target damage than the two other Ultra Greatswords, which have these sweeping light attacks. These are all the same type of weapon which share common traits, some in animations while others are in separate mechanics like a stat system. Both the Zweihander and Cathedral Knight's Greatsword rely mostly on the strength stat, for example. The Astoria Greatsword also does well with strength, but can be made to do even better with dexterity or quite well with both at the same time. The advantages of a system like this is that it is inherently content-rich and highly customizable, granting players a diverse experience that changes how they can engage with the core loops of the game. Naturally, this supports both an aesthetic of fantasy and a bit of discovery. A lot of weapons means a lot for players to look for, and many small but significant options means that players have numerous opportunities to pick something that impresses their sense of character best. Conversely, the disadvantages of such a system is that it is all around demanding. modular coding systems are necessary to keep the weapon functioning in a consistent, natural way that is balanced and bug-free. A hefty amount of art, modeling, audio, and animation is also needed to diversify the groups with effective presentation and feedback. But what about a method that concentrates elements and requires fewer designs overall? This is where the concept of weapons as archetypes appears. In this method, weapons are split into very specific types, with each acting like a sort of class. This method vastly changes the weapon down to its core, often including animations, damage values, whether the player can perform small abilities like blocking or dodging, and other requirements such as ammunition. Variety can exist in this system with upgrades and side grades, but this generally never reaches the level of the weapons as a side grade method. Examples of this system include Monster Hunter, which is by far the purest example of the system, Bloodborne, and Valheim. Monster Hunter specifically is not only a great example of excellent animation, but also how animations can create this method of weapon design. Weapons like the lance have always been special for having attacks that can hit tall, short, and flying monsters easily. This is a byproduct of the animations, those being a set of lateral and diagonal pokes with the lance, though hitboxes play a large role in this too. Comparatively, the sword and shield with its sweeping cuts has a harder time reaching the same parts a lance can. A sense of class or archetype is also created in capability. Lance and gun lance both come with large shields which compensate for the slow movement speed the weapon locks the players into when they are drawn. This both mechanically and visually supports defensive, responsive playstyles that are easily associated with the archetype/trope of a tank. To help reinforce this playstyle, the other weapons starkly contrast them. Take for example the shieldless dual blades, which features high movement speed and a moveset of many quick attacks, which build towards the idea of a rogue, with a playstyle that involves moving in and out of combat more frequently than the heavy weapon counterparts. Such a system is far more focused than its relatives and can eliminate decision paralysis as weapons embody clear archetypes with not only strong visual elements, but also notable gameplay implications. Naturally, this entails support for the aesthetic of mastery, as players will have to dedicate themselves to a weapon to understand how it works across various situations. The drawback of the system is, much like the side grade method, there are a lot of requirements in terms of arts and visuals, particularly animations, even with less weapons to do. These are necessary to diversify and create impact around what weapons there are, making them feel unique and stand out design-wise. They are also demanding in terms of design, as each must be specialized in a meaningful way. The final method we'll be looking at here is a simple and ubiquitous one which, surprise, revolves around making simple and ubiquitous weapons. This is weapons as supplements. This system focuses on providing modifications and slight but noticeable changes to a gameplay loop, but are ultimately reliant on existing animations and abilities, or just don't change all that much aside from how fast it is to kill things. This sort of system is seen widely with quite a few games, and is often modified for a more impactful experience, but ultimately relies on this base concept. This is the method that results in the weapon design seen with the Diablo and Borderlands series, along with games like The Elder Scrolls V and Skyrim. In the example games, weapons are either preset or randomly generated to degree. If you look between Diablo, Borderlands, and Skyrim, you notice that there are very few unique attack animations, and fewer that make an impact on how these weapons are used. Often, animations are just reused no matter what the weapon is, because it just makes it simple. This is a stark contrast to the way the two previous methods used animations as a core part of differentiating weapons or weapon types. Instead, these games use universal elements to differentiate weapons. In Skyrim, it's a matter of changing attack damage and speed. In Borderlands, there are more traits, but they usually have the same effect: damage dealt, fire rate, accuracy, and so on, which do not change much inside of the core loop of finding enemies, killing them, and getting loot. The advantages of such a system are straightforward. Its simple design and not too difficult in code, as the core systems do not change much other than passive effects and values like the damage dealt and what type that damage is. This simplicity is also fairly positive on the player's end. While it may look like a lot to choose from, such a system usually creates situations where one particular trait is king. It supports the aesthetic of submission. However, the system is art demanding by nature, as it requires a good amount of visual variety and appeal to keep the players engaged. And while it is initially simple design, it can snowball rather fast with larger games, as the progression of the player's power needs to be very well metered to keep them engaged. Of course, this isn't a problem if you're going for something where the aesthetic of submission is your objective. Finally, systems that surround this method, such as enemy loot drops, can make coding a more intensive task, yet one's mileage may vary depending on the game you're making. Now, these are by no means strict guidelines that games have to follow with weapon designs. In fact, it is often the case that games combine various methods, or use different methods than these, particularly outside of the realm of ARPG. Even some of the listed examples, Borderlands and Destiny, they both combine two methods. So when you're making your own game, you might find that more methods work, or a completely different method, or a new one entirely. What is important at the end of the day is how the weapons factor into the player's experience and the overarching ending of the game. The start point for that is that they should to begin with. So that is naturally where the designer comes in. It's their responsibility to figure out what has to be done in this sort of regard, what weapons should do. So that concludes part 1 of this dive into design. Part 2 will look into a practical side of this with a demo on creating some weapon designs using 2 of the methods. Thank you for watching.